Hello everyone, this is Deidre and Lowell here at Italian Cowboy in Rockport, Colton, Texas. We are going to get started on our next cooking class, and today we're going to be talking about the sun-dried tomato, which is one of our favorite pantry staples. We're going to do 3 really quick, easy recipes. So we're going to get started on the first one. Lowell's going to go ahead and start cooking up the first one.
The very complicated grilled cheese sandwich. We love a good grilled cheese sandwich, but oftentimes we're looking to accentuate the flavor. One of our favorite things to do, more migratory birds. It's going to be the migratory bird episode.
I know, we have so many beautiful birds here in Rockport.
We do.
Lots of wonderful migratory birds. Anyway.
Tomatoes and grilled cheese are a really popular combination, but we, particularly the two of us, find that a regular tomato from the store can be a bit wet, and it sort of tends to make the cheese a little more wet than we like it. And so one great alternative is the sun-dried tomato. And so what we've got here are just some really finely diced up sun-dried tomatoes. First time we made these, I did it in strips, and let's just say they don't come out of the sandwich very well. So we made them now into little dices, and we also tend to shred up the cheese. If you're trying to make a grilled cheese sandwich out of something other than just American processed cheese food, the cheese tends to melt a little more slowly than American cheese, which tends to have a lot of oil in it. And so what we do is we shred it up, helps it melt a little faster and a little more evenly. And then the other thing that we'll do here, and I'm starting this in a low, slightly warmed pan, is I'll start out by putting the lid on, because obviously what you're trying to do is get the cheese melted while the sandwich is evenly browned, and so trying to get the heat into the middle of the sandwich is really easy with a low, slow, and a little cover at the beginning. And so we've started that using a little Cowgirl Creamery wagon wheel. We love it. It's really meltable. It's a 75-day-old cow's milk cheese. Good flavor. We'll often also use like a cave-aged Gruyere or Fontina Valdosta from the Aosta Valley in Italy. And so Deidre is going to tell you why we love sun-dried tomatoes.
Well, these humble little, they look kind of sad, really, sun-dried tomatoes. They're these shriveled up little tomatoes, and so they're easy to overlook their value and importance in cooking, but they are packed with flavor. The drying process concentrates the flavor tremendously, so you get this flavor-packed umami flavor in the sun-dried tomato. Plus, they are loaded with nutrition: protein, fiber, vitamin K, vitamin A, lycopene, of course, and so they not only provide a lot of flavor, but they also provide a lot of nutrition, and they have a very long shelf life. We here are using one of the little sun-dried tomatoes that we sell in the little packages. They don't come packed in oil, these don't, but as many of you know, because you've probably been in the store, we have usually we'll have both the oil packed and the dried tomato, the dried, and they're both equally as delicious. So one of the things that you should know about sun-dried tomatoes is way back in the 90s. I feel weird
back
saying
before anyone was born.
Back in the old days. Sun-dried tomatoes were really popular in the culinary world, fancy restaurants, everything, gourmet stores, all of this. And I'd say, the early to mid 90s, they really started to make an appearance.
Them and their friends kiwi fruit, but that's another story.
Oh, yeah, I do remember the kiwi fruit. Anyway, so what you found was that they gained in popularity, and then, like a lot of times, what will happen is very bad, kind of lower quality products flooded the market. It got really trendy, and it decreased in popularity, and so you just don't see them used quite as much now in cooking as you did, back a decade or two ago. They never fell out of popularity in Italy. It's a great way of preserving tomatoes and preserving the flavor, and of course that nutrition. So just a little background. So the second thing, the second recipe we're gonna make today is one of our favorite kind of go-to pestos. It uses 4 ingredients, that's it, all from pantry staples. And so we're just gonna add a couple tiny little cloves of garlic. You can use 1, these were kind of small, that's all we had. So we're just gonna go with those. And if you have something that's a little bit bigger, probably just use 1. We have roughly 1/3 to 1/4 cup of pine nuts. They're quite delicious and creamy. They're Italian pine nuts, so they will be a little bit creamier than pine nuts you'll get from other places. So we're just gonna chop these up here.
And if you don't have pine nuts, you could use whatever nut you have on hand.
Absolutely. And there we go.
Almonds, walnuts, whatever you've got.
And then we're gonna use some of these sun-dried tomatoes, the dried ones, but what I did is just to make it easier for this little processor to chop them up, I just ripped them up, you know, to make it easier for this little guy. If you have a big processor you're using, you probably can skip that step, but that will help. And then I'm using roughly, you know, I don't really measure olive oil, to be honest, half the time, but I would say roughly 1/4 cup of olive oil, depending on how wet the sun-dried tomatoes are. So you can
pasta.
A pasta, exactly. You can just put that in, and we will chop it up in this tiny little processor, which has a little bit of a story behind it. We'll just give this a chop.
And you'll see what Deidre's doing is going back and forth to the extent that it doesn't look like it's mixing. In a smaller processor like this, moving the blade back and forth helps sort of distribute things more evenly and helps you chop it up more thoroughly.
And that's almost done. Really, part of what you can do here is just make it to your consistency. You know, a lot of people think about pesto, they think about pesto, basil pesto, pesto genovese, but in fact, pesto can occur, it's paste, really. It can occur in many different forms or formats. Sun-dried tomato pesto being one of them. And so I think
The same way that, like, for those of you that are more familiar with Mexican
we'll
food, there can be like regular tomato salsa.
Yes, or
There can be tomatillo salsa.
which is
There
delicious.
can be roasted tomato salsa.
Absolutely.
You know,
And so we have this little, as many of you know, I lived in a tiny little 450 square foot studio apartment in DC for many years. And so one had to learn to be very economical with your space, hence this teeny little processor. But what I found over the years is that it's a fabulous size for making just the right amount of pesto.
and the right amount of pesto here is actually about enough pesto for us to coat 2 meals of pasta. So we'll use pasta, beans. We'll probably use about a good 1/4 pound of pasta for the 2 of us, and a probably equal amount of beans. This pesto is really nice and thick, and so as we'll talk about in a future episode, you always want to reserve some pasta cooking water to thin out your pesto when you're making it. This one, because it is so nice and rich, actually takes a little more pasta cooking water than some. I would say for each of our servings, so for half of this, we probably use about 1/4 to 1/2 cup of pasta cooking water. It really makes it very creamy, very thick, but its use is not limited to just pasta. You could put it on bruschetta, you could coat it in some of the beans that we've been talking about before. This would work really well with ceci that we talked about in the first class. Lots of good options for
absolutely
other uses.
Absolutely. And as you can see, I like to leave it a little chunkier. It's just my preferred consistency. You can certainly adjust that to your preference. Because the sun-dried tomatoes have a little salt that they're packed in, I did not add salt and pepper to this. You of course can do so if you prefer. But we love mixing this with like a pasta and some cannellini beans or something like that, or chickpeas, and making dinner out of it. It's delicious.
Exactly. And you can hear, maybe you can't, that we've got some good melting here and we've got some good browning on one side. So I'm just gonna actually put a little oil on the other side. You'll see I'm doing this with olive oil. That's just our preference. If y'all prefer butter, have at it. But do, butter that other piece of bread before you flip it over. You'll find that oftentimes you don't get much browning on the other side, and that's because there's not any fat in the pan. We're just using a regular, again, stainless steel pan is our go-to. You can use non-stick if you're more concerned about it, but we find that we get really nice browning this way.
And it looks delicious and
it looks
smells delicious. And the sun-dried tomatoes make all the difference because then you don't have a watery grilled cheese, which is really not
Who wants
delicious.
that?
No, it's not.
And so we're up to 2 recipes, and number 3, and the thing that we love about this is all leftovers. We had a leftover little piece of cheese. The sun-dried tomatoes last forever. The pine nuts and olive oil last forever. And we're about to show you pasta salad, which we always use because we always have bits and bobs in the store. As we've mentioned before to many of you, we try everything before we decide whether or not to bring it into the store. So we always have half-open jars of this or that, and we always use this to what we use as refrigerator Velcro. The Italians call it pasta svuota-friga, clean out the fridge pasta.
Yes, and it is delicious. It's a great way to just use those little bits and bobs that you have in your pantry or fridge. So we're going to start with, this is about roughly 12 ounces of leftover pasta. I'm using this lovely pasta from Liguria. That's 25% chestnut flour. Actually, nut flours are very popular in Italy. They've used them for centuries, but certainly anything you have, you could use a penne, a macaroni, whatever you have in your pantry will work with this.
Although it's really better to have sort of what we call shapes as opposed to long, thin ones, because what you're going to be adding is a lot of little things, and so once you're stabbing or scooping, it's a lot easier than trying to, twirl up a really long pasta like a bucatini or a linguine or something like that with all these little bits and bobs.
Absolutely. That is a great point. Thank you.
That's why I'm here.
Thanks, honey. And so we've got the pasta in here, and then I'm going to add a little bit of leftover chickpeas to it. As you know, we talked about chickpeas in our first class, and Lowell and I are huge fans of chickpeas. We eat them all the time. When we have a little bit left over, this is a really delicious way to use them. We've got some leftover provolone here, which is nice and just rich and
real
delicious.
Italian provolone, so it's aged for a year. It's got a little sharpness. It's got some complexity. You could use whatever cheese you want, but definitely make it a slightly firmer cheese.
And I had a jar with a little bit of the pitted olives packed in olive oil left and a few little oil-packed artichokes left. So we're just going to add those into it, and they were packed in oil, but that's fine. We're just going to use that oil. It actually helps to season the pasta, which is delicious. And we're going to add a little bit of pine nuts to it. Now, if you have walnuts, that's fine. Any kind of nut will do. Pecans, obviously here in Texas, pecans are plentiful. We have a lot of those. A lot of times we'll add pecans to our pasta salad. Gives it a little more protein, a little crunch is really nice, and of course nutrition. And then last but not least, our delicious little sun-dried tomatoes that we chopped up. They add a really nice umami, salty deliciousness to this, and of course some beautiful color. And so we're just going to stir that up, and every single item that we put in here came out of either our fridge or our pantry. Usually, as a general rule, what we try to do is to have it where we use a ratio that's, say, I don't know, not overly just pasta, but is a little more evenly distributed. So you'll have not just pasta with like a few little bits of vegetables in it. In other words, something that's got a little bit more diversity.
It's like a third to a half pasta,
Yeah.
and 2/3 to a half stuff.
Yeah, and it's hard to explain exact measurements or ratios, but
Yeah.
just to where
It looks like that.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's not just pasta, it's all the other delicious goodness too.
And then oftentimes you'll find that pasta salad recipes have oil and vinegar. Here we actually, when we put this pasta in yesterday, we had a little left over, so we put it in the fridge. It's already been drizzled with olive oil to keep it from sticking. We're gonna add a little more olive oil now, but you'll see that since the artichokes were in olive oil, The Taggiasca olives were in olive oil. We're not going to need to add a lot. And unlike a recipe where you want to add some balsamic vinegar or something to it to punch it up, because this already has so much flavor in the sun-dried tomatoes, the provolone, and the artichokes and the olives, you actually don't really, at least for us, need that counterpoint. There's already the counterpoint in the herbed oils and vinegars that the marinated artichokes and olives are packed in.
Right. Although if you don't have oil packed, then you could certainly add your own oil, and that would be delicious. Again, whatever you have, the balsamic.
Yep.
Balsamic would be good.
Yeah, and you can use a regular balsamic. If you had a white balsamic, that would be good as well, because it would, not color the pasta.
Mm-hmm.
But again, whatever you want, it's going to taste good, and it's really just a way to use leftovers that's healthy, nutritious. It's got, there's protein in the beans and the pot and the actually the pasta.
The pasta has actually a lot of
especially because
protein.
it's a chestnut flour pasta.
Yeah.
But also the cheese, and as Deidre mentioned, the sun-dried tomatoes are just full of great, not just flavor, but it's very, very healthy. So our sandwich here is pretty much done, as Deidre has finished up that. So we're going to take that off the heat. We did have an errant sun-dried tomato, so we'll just throw that back in the pan. We've got a nice, delicious sandwich here. And we here at Italian Cowboy never forego the opportunity to have a cheese and wine pairing. So even with our grilled cheese and pasta salad, we've got a couple of options for you. The most robust one is going to be on the end. Obviously, there's a lot of rich flavor in the sun-dried tomato pesto. It's going to be creamy, but it's also got some nuttiness to it and a lot of flavor from the sun-dried tomatoes. You don't want anything too either citrusy or too fruity on the red side, because it's really going to fight with the sun-dried tomatoes, which are already sweet. So we're going to recommend here an Etna Rosa from Sicily. It's nice and earthy. It's a little lighter bodied, so it's not gonna totally overpower the pasta when you make it, or the bruschetta, but it's got some nice earthy flavors. And then with both of these, sort of Bob's your uncle. In other words, you can do whatever you want with these. There's certainly cheesy, creamy in both of them, but there's also the robust tomatoes. And so you could go white or red depending on what you wanted. On the white side, you've got some more northern Italian flavors. I think it's good to take a cue there. You want something a little citrusy, but not too overpowering, certainly not smooth and creamy, in that sort of Chardonnay-esque. We've got a Pinot Bianco, which is right in between. That would work with either of these on the white side, or if you wanted something red, you'd want to go with something that's a little more on the lighter side. The Rosso di Dardi here is 100% Nebbiolo. You could obviously go with Nebbiolo from the Langhe. This is in that Pinot Noir style vein. It's a lighter fruited wine. It's not going to overpower these two, but it's going to accentuate the sun-dried tomatoes, or in here, the tomatoes, the provolone, and the like. So either one, whether or not you like white or red, never pass up the opportunity to do a little pairing, even with your pasta salad or your grilled cheese.
They're all three delicious choices, honey. I mean, you're not going to go wrong with any of these wines. They're wonderful, and all well-priced wines as well. All great values. So we hope this gives you just a little bit of idea about how to use up things that are in your pantry, or utilize things in maybe a different way. A lot of times, one of the things that we've noticed in the store is people will come in and say, well, I bought this ingredient for this recipe, and now I have this amount left over, and I'm not exactly sure what to do with it. And so the pasta salad is one of the things that we've suggested. Another great way you could use this same recipe but modify it using farro. That's another thing we would suggest. You could take this exact same recipe, and instead of the pasta, you could use a farro.
Farro,
which
couscous,
would be
quinoa,
delicious.
anything that's going to sort of provide that sort of starchiness to it.
Absolutely, to kind of
really
bulk
wonderful.
up the dish. That's exactly. And so we hope this gives you a kind of a jumping off point and some delicious ways to use the
that sun-dried tomato
that
packet that's been sitting in the back of your cabinet for a week, a month, and you have no idea what to do with.
What do I do with that little thing? So and then next class,
we're going to be, I think,
speaking of the pantry, things sitting in the pantry that are delicious to use.
we're going to show you how to use up the leftover polenta you've got over there.
So until then, Thanks so much, you guys. Take care, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for stopping by.
Bye-bye.